The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between a water bill and a grocery store coupon, as if it were nothing, as if it were ordinary. Lydia Hargrove stood at her kitchen counter in her robe, coffee going cold beside her, and read it 3 times before her hands started to shake. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Owen Hargrove and Simone Delacroix. Owen, her husband of 9 years, who had handed her divorce papers 11 months ago, while she was 7 months pregnant, who had told her with a calmness that she still couldn't understand, that he had outgrown her, that Simone was the kind of woman who matched the life he was building now, that Lydia, with her sensible shoes and her teacher's salary and her quiet, unglamorous loyalty, was a chapter he needed to close. She set the invitation down on the counter, picked up her coffee, put it back down. In the living room she could hear the soft sounds of her twins waking up. 11 months old. Ava and Eli, who had never once heard their father's voice in person, because Owen Hargrove had not visited, had not called, had sent a single text message 2 days after they were born. Congrats. Hope everything went well. And then nothing. Not a check. Not a card. Not a single question about whether they were healthy, whether they were sleeping, whether his daughter had her mother's eyes or his. She had kept that text. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was the only proof that he had ever acknowledged they existed. The invitation had a handwritten note tucked inside. Owen's handwriting. She still knew it after all these years, the way the O looped too wide, the way he pressed too hard on the downstrokes. Lydia, I think it would mean a lot if you came. Show everyone there are no hard feelings. It'll be good for the kids to see their father's new life. No drama, just closure. No drama, just closure. She folded the note in half and dropped it in the trash. She went back to teaching on a Monday in September, 6 weeks after the twins were born, because she didn't have a choice. The district didn't offer extended maternity leave. Her savings, what was left of them after Owen had drained the joint account the week he left, covered exactly 1 month of rent and daycare. She pumped breast milk in the supply closet between 2nd and 3rd period. She graded papers at 2 in the morning after the twins finally went down. She ate crackers and peanut butter for dinner, more nights than she would ever admit to anyone. She had not told many people how bad it was. Her sister Karen knew some of it. Her colleague Beth had started quietly leaving extra food in the staff refrigerator with a post-it that said, "For whoever needs it," and Lydia had understood and had never mentioned it, and had been grateful in a way that still made her throat tighten. The people in Owen's circle knew a different version. They knew the version Owen had told, that the marriage had simply run its course, that they had grown apart, that these things happen. They didn't know about the drained account. They didn't know that he had stopped responding to her attorney's calls about child support for 4 months. They didn't know that Lydia had filed a motion with the court in March, and that Owen's lawyer had contested it, and that they were still waiting for a hearing date, and that in the meantime she was doing everything alone. Some of them still texted her. "So sorry to hear about you and Owen. You okay? Let me know if you need anything." She knew what "let me know if you need anything" meant. It meant nothing. It meant I said the right thing and now the conversation is over. She didn't resent them for it. She had learned, in the past 11 months, that people were not cruel so much as they were simply busy. They had their own lives, their own problems. They moved on. What surprised her, what she turned over in her mind on the nights she couldn't sleep, was how quickly they had all moved toward Owen, how seamlessly he had absorbed their sympathy. He was the one who was starting over, building something new, moving forward. That narrative was so much easier to root for than hers, which was just surviving, staying upright, feeding 2 babies and showing up to work and trying not to cry in front of her students. She was not interesting in the way that recovery stories were interesting. She was just a woman treading water. For now. She met Dr. Nathaniel Reed at a parent-teacher conference in October. He was there for his niece, a quiet, serious girl named Sophie, who sat in the 3rd row of Lydia's 5th grade class and wrote the most precise, beautiful sentences of anyone Lydia had taught in 14 years. The girl's parents were overseas for a research posting, and Nathaniel was her guardian for the year. He was not what Lydia expected when a man named Dr. Nathaniel Reed walked into a school conference room. She had expected someone distracted, someone checking his phone, someone who would nod through the meeting and ask no real questions. What she got was a man who had clearly read every piece of feedback she had ever written on Sophie's assignments, who asked 3 specific questions about Sophie's reading comprehension and one about her social dynamics, and who listened to the answers with the kind of focused attention that Lydia had forgotten people were capable of. "She writes like she's already 35, Lydia told him. "I mean that as a compliment." "She gets that from her mother," he said, and there was something soft in his expression that she didn't press on. They spoke for 20 minutes. He thanked her twice, once when he arrived, once when he left, and both times it seemed genuine. She thought about him for a strange, unexpected moment as she walked back to her classroom. Then she put it away and went back to her papers. He came back 2 weeks later, not for a conference, just to drop something off at the front office for Sophie. She was coming down the hallway when she saw him, and he saw her, and he stopped. "Mrs. Hargrove, Mr. Reed, it's Dr. Reed, right? Nathaniel is fine." He smiled. It was a good smile, understated, like he wasn't performing it. "How is Sophie doing?" "Exceptionally." He walked with her back toward her classroom, which she later decided had been intentional on his part, though at the time she told herself it was coincidence. They talked about Sophie. They talked briefly about a book Sophie had mentioned at home that she'd discussed in class. He asked if Lydia had always taught 5th grade. 14 years, she said. "Same school? You love it." It wasn't a question. She looked at him. "How can you tell?" "Because you said 14 years. Same school, the way most people say, I finally found the right place." She didn't know what to say to that. She opened the door to her classroom and he stopped at the threshold. "I'd like to take you to dinner sometime," he said, "if that's something you'd be open to." Lydia Hargrove had not been on a date in 11 years. She had 2 11-month-old babies at home. She had a custody hearing pending and a checking account that made her feel slightly sick every time she opened the app. "I have twins," she said. "They're not yet a year old." He didn't flinch. "I have a niece who thinks I need to get out more. I think she's right." She laughed. She hadn't expected to. "Okay," she said. "Yes." The dinner was in November. Dinner became a walk. The walk became standing outside on a cold sidewalk for another 40 minutes, because neither of them wanted to stop talking. She told him about the twins. Not the hard version, not yet, but the real version. The way Ava grabbed her own feet like she'd just discovered them. The way Eli laughed at ceiling fans with a kind of philosophical delight. He told her about Sophie's parents, about his work. He ran a private equity firm that had started as a small fund 12 years ago and had grown into something that occasionally made the financial pages, though he mentioned this briefly and without self-congratulation. She had Googled him after the first conference. She knew the contours of it. She hadn't mentioned it. By December, he had met the twins. Ava had grabbed his finger with both hands and refused to let go, which Lydia thought was either a good sign or simply a function of Ava's general policy on fingers. Eli had stared at him with the profound, unblinking assessment that babies apparently conducted on all strangers, and then fallen asleep on his shoulder, which Nathaniel had handled with a stillness that she found oddly moving. By February, she had told him the real version. The drained account, the 4 months of silence on the child support, the nights she had eaten peanut butter crackers, the supply closet where she pumped between classes. He listened. He didn't perform outrage. He didn't clench his jaw or say that man is unbelievable for her benefit. He just listened, and when she was done, he said, "What do you need right now?" "I have a hearing in 6 weeks, she said. "I'm representing myself because I can't afford to keep paying my attorney's retainer." He had said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I know someone. Let me make a call." She had started to object. He had looked at her with the patient, clear-eyed steadiness that she was beginning to understand was simply who he was. "Let me make a call," he said again, quietly, not a command, an offering. She had nodded. The attorney he referred her to was named Margaret Voss. She had 22 years of family law experience and a reputation that apparently preceded her into rooms before she arrived. Margaret took one look at Lydia's case and said, without ceremony, "He's going to wish he'd settled in October." The hearing was in March. Owen's attorney showed up confident. Margaret showed up prepared. The judge ordered full back payment of child support, a structured ongoing payment schedule, and a legal note in the record that Owen's 4-month non-response period constituted willful non-compliance. Owen sat at the table across from her with the expression of a man who had genuinely not expected consequences. Lydia had looked at him once during the proceedings, just once. She hadn't needed to look again. Spring moved through the city slowly, then all at once. The twins turned one. Ava said her first word, more, with a demanding clarity that Lydia felt in her chest. And Eli followed 3 days later with light, pointing at the window, which Lydia found so unbearably poetic that she cried in the kitchen afterward where they couldn't see her. She had not responded to Owen's wedding invitation. She had put it in the trash, and she had not thought about it for 3 weeks. Then she made the mistake of answering a call from her old friend Denise, who was still in Owen's social circle and who still tried, with good intentions and bad judgment, to keep a foot in both worlds. "You got the invitation, right?" Denise said. "I got it. Are you going?" "No, Lydia." Denise's voice shifted into the register of careful diplomacy. Owen was saying, and I'm just passing this along, I'm not editorializing. He was saying that if you didn't come, it would look like you were still angry, like you couldn't move on. And with the custody stuff still being sorted out, he thinks a public show of Denise goodwill would be Denise. Stop. Silence. "He abandoned his children," Lydia said. "He drained our account and disappeared for 4 months and hasn't once asked what their names are. I'm not attending his wedding to make him look like a decent person." Another silence. Then quietly, "He told people you asked him to leave." She had expected something like this. She had expected it, and still it landed somewhere cold and specific behind her sternum. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I just thought you should know what's out there." "I know, Denise. Thank you." She hung up and sat on the floor of her kitchen for a while. The twins were asleep. The apartment was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. She thought about what it meant that Owen had been constructing a story. That somewhere in the city, people were nodding along to a version of her life that she hadn't lived, feeling sympathetic toward a man who had walked out of a hospital without holding his newborns. She thought about what Denise had said. It would look like you couldn't move on. She stood up. She went to her bedroom. She took the wedding invitation out of the trash. She had not actually thrown it away. She realized, only moved it to the recycling basket in her office, which said something she didn't fully examine, and she read it one more time. She thought about Ava grabbing Nathaniel's finger, about Eli asleep on his shoulder, about Margaret Voss in that courtroom saying willful non-compliance in a voice like a door closing. She thought about the supply closet, the crackers, the 2 a.m. grading sessions. She picked up her phone and called Nathaniel. "I think I want to go," she said when he answered. "To Owen's wedding." A pause. "Okay. He's been telling people I asked him to leave. He wants me there to perform forgiveness, to make him look like a good person in front of everyone who knows us. And you want to go anyway?" "I want to go," she said slowly, "because I'm done being the version of me that he told everyone about. I want them to see who I actually am." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured and warm. "Then we'll go," he said. "All of us." "You don't have to, Lydia." She could hear him almost smiling. "I want to." The wedding was held at Whitmore House, a restored estate on the outskirts of the city that rented itself out for events of a certain scale and ambition. Owen had done well in the years since the separation. He'd made partner at his firm, had moved into a new apartment in the right neighborhood, had become the kind of man who was photographed at charity galas and tagged by lifestyle accounts. Simone Delacroix was a former model turned brand consultant with 30,000 followers and a face that looked like it had been professionally lit at birth. They were, objectively, a beautiful couple. They had curated themselves into one. Lydia knew all of this because she had looked. She wasn't ashamed of it. You had to know the terrain. She arrived in Nathaniel's car. Not a limousine, something quieter and more precise than that, the kind of vehicle that announced wealth through restraint rather than declaration. She had spent 3 weeks finding a dress. Karen had taken the twins for one afternoon, and they had gone to 4 stores, and Lydia had tried on 11 dresses, and finally, in a small boutique near the Arts District, found it. Deep emerald silk fitted through the waist, simple in the way that very expensive things are simple. She looked like herself. She looked like the best version of herself, which was the only version she intended to present today. Nathaniel wore a dark charcoal suit and looked like someone who had not needed to think about what to wear because everything he owned was exactly right. She had told him this getting into the car, and he had said, "You look extraordinary." And she had looked out the window, because something about the way he said it made her want to cry, and she absolutely was not going to cry today. Ava wore a white dress with small yellow flowers. Eli wore a tiny suit with a clip-on bow tie that he had already removed by the time they reached the venue. She had thought, walking up the steps of Whitmore House, that she might feel small, that the columns and the manicured hedges and the sound of a string quartet drifting from inside might shrink her back into the woman who ate crackers at 2 in the morning and pumped milk in a supply closet. She did not feel small. She felt, for the first time in a long time, like exactly who she was. The reaction was not immediate. That was the thing no one told you about these moments. They didn't arrive as a single crash. They came in waves. The first wave was the door. The double doors to Whitmore House's main hall were propped open for arriving guests, and when Lydia walked through with Nathaniel beside her and the twins in the double stroller between them, the nearest cluster of guests, Owen's colleagues, people she recognized from company parties and holiday gatherings, went quiet in a way that moved outward like a ripple. She saw the recognition move across their faces. Lydia. And then the secondary recognition. Who is that with her? And those children. She walked through it the way she had learned to walk through hard things this past year, steadily, with her chin up, without breaking pace. The second wave was Denise, who found her near the cocktail table with an expression of barely contained astonishment. "You came," Denise said. "I came," Lydia said. Denise's eyes moved to Nathaniel, then to the twins. Ava had grabbed a cocktail napkin and was eating the corner of it with intense satisfaction. Eli was looking around the room with his philosophical ceiling fan expression applied now to the chandeliers. "Is this?" Denise started. "Nathaniel Reed," he said, extending his hand with a calm pleasantness that Lydia had come to understand was not performed. It was simply him. "It's nice to meet you." Denise shook his hand and said something that Lydia didn't catch, because she had just seen Owen. He was across the room. He was standing with a group of partners from his firm, laughing at something, holding a glass of champagne with the ease of a man who had entirely forgotten this day might be complicated. Then someone in his group noticed Lydia and said something, and Owen turned. She watched his face do 3 things in quick succession: recognize her, register Nathaniel beside her, and look at the twins. He had not seen them before. He had not once in 13 months come to see them. She watched him look at his children for the first time. She had thought when she imagined this moment, and she had imagined it, in the small hours of sleepless nights, that she would feel triumph, or rage, or the particular cold pleasure of karma arriving on schedule. She felt none of those things. What she felt was something quieter and more complete than any of them. She felt the specific clarity of a person who's carried something very heavy for a very long time, and has just set it down. Owen made his way across the room. She had known he would. He had too much ego to stay planted. He stopped a few feet away. He looked expensive. He looked, she noticed, with a detachment that surprised her, like a stranger. "Lydia." His voice had the careful, modulated warmth of a man performing composure. "I'm glad you came." "Owen." She kept her voice even, friendly even. She had decided on friendly. His eyes moved to Nathaniel. "Owen Hargrove," he said, extending his hand. Nathaniel shook it. "Nathaniel Reed." He said nothing else. He didn't need to. Owen's jaw did something small and involuntary. Owen looked at the twins. Ava was still working on the cocktail napkin. Eli had reached up and grabbed the edge of Nathaniel's jacket lapel and was examining the fabric with the focused curiosity he applied to all unfamiliar textures. "They've gotten big," Owen said. The silence that followed was a specific shape. Lydia felt it. Nathaniel felt it. Several people nearby felt it. "They've gotten big," as if he had been watching from a distance, as if the distance had been circumstances and not a choice. "They have," Lydia said. "Ava, Eli." She said their names clearly into the room. Owen nodded. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. There was something moving behind his face. She couldn't tell if it was regret or simply the discomfort of a man who had just realized that the story he'd been telling didn't hold in front of the evidence. "You look well," he said finally. It sounded like a surrender. "I am," she said. "I really am." She did not stay for the ceremony. She had never intended to. She had come to stand in this room, in this dress, with her children, and the man who had shown up for all of them in the ways that mattered. She had come to exist, visibly and undeniably, as herself. She did not make a speech. She did not confront Simone. She did not cry, or raise her voice, or do anything that could be described, later, as drama. She stayed for 40 minutes. She spoke to 3 people she had genuinely liked and had missed without realizing it. She accepted a glass of sparkling water and a small plate of appetizers and ate them with the twins balanced in the stroller, and Nathaniel stood beside her the whole time with the particular quality of presence she had come to think of as his. Not possessive, not performative, just there. When they left, she pushed the stroller through the double doors and out into the late afternoon light, which was gold and slanted and unexpectedly warm for the time of year. Nathaniel walked beside her. Ava had fallen asleep. Eli was watching the sky with the expression he got when something was interesting to him. "Okay?" Nathaniel asked. She thought about it. The honest answer, the actual answer. "Yes," she said. Genuinely. He put his hand at the small of her back as they walked toward the car, and she let herself lean into it, slightly, just enough. Eli pointed at a cloud. She found out later, from Denise, who called the next morning barely containing herself, that Owen and Simone's wedding had not been the triumphant event they'd planned. The guest list had spent more time talking about Lydia than paying attention to the ceremony. Owen's partners, several of whom had now met Nathaniel Reed and knew precisely who he was, had questions Owen was unprepared to answer. Simone had apparently not been told about the twins, not the version Owen had constructed, and had left the reception early. Denise said all of this with a complicated energy that was half apology and half fascination. "He told her there were children," Denise said. "He just apparently didn't mention the other parts. The part where he left me pregnant. The part where he—" "Yes." Lydia let the silence hold for a moment. "I hope she's okay," she said. And she meant it. Simone had not been unkind to her personally. She had simply chosen a man who edited himself to others and expected the edits to hold. "What happens now?" Denise asked. "With you and, is it serious? With Nathaniel?" Lydia looked across her kitchen, where Ava was standing in the playpen gripping the edge with both hands and bouncing with a determination that suggested she would be walking within the week. Eli was on the mat nearby, stacking rings onto a peg with the deliberate focus of an engineer. "I don't know yet," she said. "We're figuring it out. He seems—" Denise started, then stopped, then said, "He looked at you like—" "I know," Lydia said softly. "I know." The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Lydia had been inside enough fairy tales to know how they worked. The sudden transformation, the lifted curse, the perfect resolution that erased the difficult years entirely. That wasn't what happened. What happened was, the child support payments started coming on time. Owen's attorney sent a letter in June requesting a revised visitation schedule, which meant Owen was finally, belatedly, thinking about his children. Possibly out of guilt, possibly out of image management, possibly because something had genuinely shifted in him. Lydia passed the letter to Margaret Voss, who handled it. What happened was, she went back to school in September, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't dread Monday mornings. Sophie had gone back to her parents overseas over the summer, and in September Lydia had a new class. 22 kids, all of them particular and surprising in their ways. She still graded papers late at night sometimes, but now it was by choice rather than desperation. And there was a difference she felt in her body. What happened was, Nathaniel asked her on a quiet Sunday in October, while the twins napped, and the city went golden outside the windows, if she would consider moving in with him. He said it carefully, without pressure, as he said most things. He said, "I know the timing is. Everything is still new, I know that. But I want to ask, because I want you to know that I'm asking." She had looked at him, across the kitchen table. She thought about the supply closet, the crackers. The 2 a.m. she thought about Ava on the floor of the conference room eating a cocktail napkin. About Eli and ceiling fans. She thought about the dress she had worn to Owen's wedding. About the way she had walked through those doors and felt, for the first time in a long time, like her own ground. "Give me until after the new year," she said. "Let's do it right." He smiled, that same understated smile. "Okay," he said. Ava woke up then, announcing herself at full volume from the bedroom, and they both stood up at the same time, and they looked at each other across the kitchen, and Lydia thought, This is what it was supposed to look like. This is what I was waiting for, without knowing I was waiting. She went to get Ava. Nathaniel went to put on the kettle. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor. Outside, the city kept going, and inside, in that quiet and ordinary and entirely extraordinary kitchen, something that had been broken for a very long time, finally, quietly, finished becoming whole.